Hey you! Yeah, you! Struggling on making your drawings move? Want to animate but just don't know where to start? Well, don't you worry, friend. Usually this type of info would cost you $1 bajillion, but lucky for you, today, and only today, it's free! So let's get started. Hello, my name is Omnific, or Omni for short. I enjoy creating art and animation for fun. I am no means of a professional, however, the information that I will be sharing with you today are things I learned and studied through my art journey, and hopefully it'll help you with yours. I will be using Clip Studio Paint EX to animate due to it having a timeline that is good for managing layers like the animation folders, and it also has some great brushes that are customizable to make them look more traditional, which I very much like. Okay, so in the world of animation, we have what's called the 12 principles of animation, which are essentially the foundation or guidelines of what makes a drawing come to life. These principles include spacing and timing, slow in and slow out, anticipation and overshoot, squash and stretch, arcs, pose to pose and straight ahead, follow through and overlapping action, secondary action, exaggeration, staging, solid drawings, and appeal. However, I will be going over a selective few that I think are the most important to help you just get started, with some bonus tips included. Timing is more focused on how long a drawing will last on screen, and spacing is more focused on where the drawings are being placed. Let's talk about timing first. You might have heard the term 12 FPS and 24 FPS in animation, meaning how many frames will be in a second. Having more frames like 24 FPS can create smoother-like animations, but take longer, while 12 FPS can be slightly more choppy. Which is not a bad thing, mind you. It can get the job done while also cutting half the work and time. It ultimately depends on the artist's preference or the project, with some working better in 24 FPS and others in 12 FPS. Now, let me go a little more in detail in how it works. So, if I'm working in 12 FPS, it would look like this, with the little bars representing the frames. Now, if I drew a ball here, point A being the start and point B being the end, it would take 12 frames or 1 second for it to travel. But now, let's try to fill each frame with the ball, still taking 1 second from point A to point B. But now it looks like this. It's moving across. Drawing on all the frames like this is called drawing on ones. This one is called drawing on twos because the drawings will last for 2 frames, and this one, drawing on threes, will last for 3 frames. The drawings stay on screen for different times, but they all still last for 1 second. It's pretty common for 24 FPS to be on 2s and 12 FPS to be on 1s, although it's up to the animators to decide when to use 1s, 2s, and 3s, usually influenced by weight and movement in their desired animation. 1s are usually used for fast action, 2s and 3s are usually used for normal paced animation. You're also not limited to sticking to one specifically. Your animation can vary and have all 1s, 2s, and 3s combined in a single animation. You just gotta know when to use them. Now, for spacing, as the name suggests, it's about spacing your drawings. Back to the ball moving across, it's animated on 2s here, but looks stiff or mechanical. But let's try to spread the spacing apart in between each drawing, but still holding for 2 frames. Now it looks more natural or fluid, and we still have the same number of drawings and time. Something to remember as well, the closer the drawings are together, the slower it appears. The farther apart, and the faster it looks. Playing with spacing is the same as playing with speed. Spacing your drawings close together before starting your main action is called ease in, or speeding up, and after your action is called ease out, or slowing down. It's natural for an object to gain speed or momentum and slow down before making its full stop. Here are a few examples of using slow in and slow out. Here's a bonus tip. If you're using an animation software like I am and want to see your previous drawing or your future drawing that you've already made, you can turn on onion skin. If you are working traditionally, you can flip the papers back and forth too. Onion skin can be helpful to determine or visualize how a pose needs to be in between drawings, helping to keep that consistency. However, don't rely on them too much, as your main focus should be if the drawing feels right or is moving correctly. So just keep an eye on the spacing. Now let's focus on anticipation and overshoot. Let's say our character here wants to jump across this gap. You have a stationary pose, the action pose, and another stationary pose at the end of their jump. If we try to animate them jumping, adding drawings in between these three poses, the result would make it really awkward or stiff. So let's add an anticipation pose, where they go down to build up tension like a spring, legs bent and arms raised, helping viewers anticipate his next action. Then they'll release that tension with the jump, and when they land, we will add an overshoot pose. Meaning the character is still in motion after landing, going past the stationary frame, giving that extra weight. Now it should look more natural. Here are some examples where this is being used. Finally, squash and stretch. If we have a bouncing ball, it usually squashes towards the bottom due to weight, and stretches when going fast back up. Bear in mind that the ball does not change in volume or shape when doing so. What do I mean by this? Well, when you squish this little guy, his weight is distributed evenly outwards, and when you stretch him, his weight is distributed evenly inwards. Doing squash or stretch to objects or characters make them feel more organic, or the illusion of different materials. I could have a basketball on this side and a rubber ball on the other side, and you can tell which object is more influenced by squash and stretch. Squash and stretch can also be seen a lot for storytime animators here on YouTube, where they use it as a way to convey motion when speaking. Kind of like what I'm doing already, squishing their characters and stretching when changing expressions. In animation, the more you can exaggerate the gesture, the better on how lively it will look. Here's a bonus tip. When animating, keep in mind of arcs. Simply, arcs are curved paths. Almost every movement has some sort of arc it follows, helping to make motion flow better and look more natural or organic. If you create an animation that follows a linear path, more than likely it will be something mechanical like a car or robot. Think on the path that your hand follows when reaching your pencil or picking up a book, creating slight arcs. Alright, now that we know the bare basics of animation, we can make something. Usually, you want to start your animation like building a house. You create a blueprint of steps and build from that foundation. First, you'll want to make a storyboard. The first step is probably the easiest, since all you gotta do is just draw your ideas down. This is done by making really rough thumbnails, and while some artists may want to make them detailed, I highly recommend keeping them very simple and rough. Sometimes these ideas can change, and time in animation is valuable. And don't forget to create mood boards to help visualize what you want and start collecting references. Next is making an animatic. The difference between storyboard and animatic is that storyboard is a set of drawings like a comic, and an animatic is when you gather those sets of drawings and put them together in a video. Essentially, animatics are still very rough and are usually used to time your scenes. For example, if you have audio or music in your animation, you'll want to create an animatic to be in sync with that. Animatics are used to help suggest what is happening in your animation, again, being a blueprint for the next step. Next up, we've got rough animations. In my opinion, is probably the most vital step when it comes to building our animation. Here, we're going to focus on creating keyframes. Keyframes are the most important poses that define our actions, your storytelling poses. If I have a figure here standing and then I have them jump, these two poses are considered key poses because I understand the main action of the figure. When animators focus on drawing only keyframes, that is called pose to pose. Usually used on animating characters, it helps to visualize or map out where the animation will go. While if you draw from one frame and then draw the next frame for that, and so forth, that is called straight ahead. These are used when animating things like smoke or fire, typically 2D FX effects, objects that are organic or difficult to predict its movements. But for now, I will be focusing on creating pose-to-pose keyframes for this demonstration. Unlike the animatic, I want to try to get as close as possible to the characters, trying to keep proportions consistent and keeping in mind to draw those key poses that will define my action. Personally, I like to turn the characters into basic shapes because it's easier for me to understand, and the main thing I want to concentrate on is getting the movements right. Side note, that my method works for me while other animators with good observation skills can draw their characters a lot more detailed when it comes to keyframes. It really depends on your preferred workflow. Also, it's great to keep a rough sheet of the character you'll be animating. A lot of times the rough sheet has specific angles already drawn, and it's good to look back on. Next, while still in the rough animation stage, we will focus on adding our extremes. Extremes are what we already went over, either anticipation, overshoot, squash and stretch, basically poses that change in direction. Sometimes extremes can be exaggerated, like if you're adding an anticipation, or it can be subtle, like a slight overshoot. When adding extremes, remember to play back your animation often so you can see if the movements feel right to you. After adding my extremes, now we have breakdowns. Again, still working on our rough animation stage, breakdowns are poses that help transition to the next pose, usually to give extra information or personality. When adding them, keep in mind of your spacing. Not all breakdowns are dead center or in the middle of your pose if you are using onion skin. Remember your spacing and where that breakdown should be placed. Sometimes it will favor one frame to be closer, or sometimes your animation will have multiple breakdowns in order to convey more emotions. Then we have in between frames. These are drawings made in between your frames to smooth out your animation, unifying it all together. After that, you should have a completed rough animation. Our next step is to do tie downs. Still rough, but we're going to focus on getting cleaner lines. Sometimes it's also called a rough pass, but it's just about adding details like clothing or accessories. First, you'll want to go over your frames and refine the lines a bit more. Then, a way to add other details to your rough animation is the same way in how you initially built your rough animation. First on keyframes, then on your extremes, then your breakdowns, and finally your in-betweens. Personally, I like to create a second layer where I am focusing on drawing the clothes or accessories, because sometimes they will have their own separate space and timing animation. Then we have the cleanup stage, which in my opinion is the most tedious and time-consuming part of animation. There's not much to say about it other than you go frame by frame and start creating the line art. It's definitely my least favorite part of doing the animation process. Finally, I can add colors. This is also pretty straightforward, just go frame by frame and fill in the colors for each section with the paint bucket tool. Some advice, however, when you're doing the line art for the cleanup stage, make sure all your lines are closed off or completed. If you have any opening gaps, you'll have to close them off in order to use the paint bucket tool. And there you have it, we made an animation. Hopefully you got some good stuff from this video and found it entertaining, informative, or both. I tried my best to simplify some of the animation terms because that's the best way for me to understand. Again, the program I used to create this animation was Clip Studio Paint EX, which is available on multiple devices like PC, tablet, smartphone, and also has a free trial, so that's pretty neat. So yeah, thank you for watching and supporting my content throughout these years. Hopefully this gets you started on your animation journey and inspires you to make some animation. I look forward to seeing it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all again in the next one. Until then, take care and be kind.